At a time when NFL owners could own a player for life, and star athletes earned 40% less than their peers in other sports, Reggie White, a minister's son from Chattanooga, refused to play by their rules. His decision to defy the league's control and to trust a voice he called divine did not just change football salaries, it threatened the entire system and stunned the nation. But what does it take for one man to break the NFL? And why did that same faith later put his reputation on the line? NFL owners enforced a system that gave them lifelong control over athletes' careers. The reserve clause, a single line in every contract, meant that even after a player's deal expired, the team could keep him for another year with only a minimal raise. If another team tried to sign him, the original club could match the offer or demand steep compensation. For decades, this clause locked players in place, turning careers into property and leverage into a myth. By the early 1990s, the financial gap was glaring. NFL players, many of them battered by short careers and constant risk, earned about 40% less than their counterparts in baseball or basketball. The average NFL salary lagged far behind, and stars who defined the league were often paid less than role players in other sports. Owners, meanwhile, saw profits surge, protected by a system that suppressed salaries and movement. The illusion of competition was shattered in 1990 when a federal jury found that NFL owners had colluded to keep player pay artificially low. The verdict was $600 million owed to players for years of secret agreements and backroom deals. Internal memos and court testimony revealed how owners met in private to design rules that would keep wages down and player power contained. The message was clear. Any player who challenged the system risked his career. For most athletes, the threat was enough. Contracts were signed with little negotiation. The fear of blacklisting, being quietly shut out of the league, kept even superstars in line. Agents and union leaders warned that open defiance could mean the end of a career, not just a lost contract. The few who spoke out, like Reggie White, faced not just financial risk, but the possibility of being erased from the game entirely. Against this backdrop, the need for a catalyst, a player willing to risk everything, became urgent. The reserve clause in the collusion verdict had exposed the system's cracks, but real change required someone bold enough to step through them. The stakes were no longer just about money. They were about who truly controlled the future of the game. Reggie White's first lessons about power came long before the NFL. In Chattanooga, his father, Charles White, worked the lines at a Tennessee factory and organized black workers who were tired of being pushed aside. Charles carried himself with quiet authority, never missing a chance to remind his son, "Don't let anyone own you." That phrase was more than advice. It was a warning, shaped by years of witnessing men's futures traded away for the sake of someone else's profit. Reggie watched his father stand up to bosses who tried to break the union, sometimes risking his job for the sake of fairness. The message stuck. Dignity was not something you waited for. It was something you claimed, even when the cost was high. At home, faith was as much a part of life as work. Reggie's mother, Thelma, filled the house with gospel music and prayer, teaching her son that strength and humility could live side by side. By age 12, Reggie was already preaching to neighborhood kids in the backyard, delivering sermons with a booming voice that seemed to belong to someone twice his size. His reputation grew, and by 17, while most classmates were planning prom, Reggie was ordained as a Baptist minister. The local church handed him a pulpit and a congregation, trusting a teenager to guide adults through their own struggles. He took the responsibility seriously, spending nights preparing sermons and days visiting elders who could not make it to Sunday service. This early ministry was not just about faith, it was about leadership. Reggie learned to listen, to comfort, and to challenge people to do better. He saw the pulpit as a place to speak truth, even when it made people uncomfortable. That courage would become his armor in locker rooms and courtrooms years later. On the field, he carried his father's lessons about ownership and his mother's sense of calling. When coaches tried to box him in, Reggie found ways to break free, inventing new moves and refusing to let anyone dictate his limits. The foundation was set. Leadership gave him purpose, and his father's union grit gave him the backbone to use it.
Quarterbacks dreaded facing Reggie White. In 8 seasons with the Philadelphia Eagles, he racked up 124 sacks, an average of more than 15 each year. He won NFL Defensive Player of the Year twice, in 1987 and 1991, and made the Pro Bowl every single season he wore an Eagles jersey. His signature move, the club, a violent swing of his forearm, sent linemen stumbling like bowling pins. But his dominance didn't stop at the line of scrimmage. Reggie was just as commanding in the locker room, where his booming voice led post-game prayers and spontaneous sermons. Some teammates found comfort in his faith, but others felt uneasy. White's convictions, shaped by years in Southern churches and union halls, didn't always fit the culture of a big city, racially mixed team. He would challenge teammates about their choices, sometimes quoting scripture, sometimes talking about dignity and ownership. White saw football as his ministry, but not everyone wanted a sermon after practice. Despite his heroics, 21 sacks in 1987, still a franchise record, the Eagles kept falling short in the playoffs. The front office, wary of his outspokenness, refused to pay him what he was worth. They offered lowball deals, hoping he'd accept less to stay. White pushed back, demanding not just money, but respect. The tension grew with every contract negotiation. He was the team's anchor, but also its conscience, a combination that made him powerful, and to some, dangerous. As the losses piled up and the offers stayed low, the question became whether the Eagles valued his leadership or feared his influence. The answer would come soon, but not on the field. In September 1992, Reggie White took the witness stand in a Minneapolis federal courtroom, staring down a row of NFL lawyers and owners who controlled the fate of every player in the league. Under oath, he described a system that didn't just limit opportunity, it erased it. White explained how, even after a contract ended, teams could hold a player's rights, choke off negotiations, and keep salaries low. He spoke plainly. The league treated players as property, not people. His words cut through legal jargon, landing with a force that startled even seasoned reporters. He said, "They thought they could scare me into silence. They were wrong. The risk was immediate and personal." White's name was printed at the top of the lawsuit, making him the face of a rebellion that owners wanted crushed. Whispers began to circulate among agents and front office staff. Some teams were quietly told to steer clear of him, to let him dangle in free agency as a warning to others. The Eagles' front office, already reluctant to meet his demands, grew even more distant. Other teams, flush with cap space and need, suddenly cooled their interest. For a player with his record, 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, Pro Bowls every season, this chill was impossible to explain any other way. White's friends and advisors warned him that he'd put a target on his back, but he refused to back down. He told reporters that real change was worth any price, even if it meant sacrificing the prime years of his career. Alone against the league, he became a symbol of what it meant to challenge power, not just for himself, but for every player who dreamed of controlling his own future. On December 6, 1993, Reggie White called Packers general manager Ron Wolf at 7:30 in the morning and said he was coming to Green Bay. The deal, 4 years, $17 million, with a $4.5 million signing bonus, was the largest contract for a defensivest player in NFL history at the time. 8 teams had chased White, including the San Francisco 49ers, who offered as much as $2 million more per year. Washington and other contenders dangled tradition, big markets, and championship rosters but White turned them down. At the press conference, he faced the cameras and said, God told me to go to Green Bay, not San Francisco, not Washington, Green Bay. That single line did more than soften the blow for fans still stunned by the price tag. It flipped the entire conversation. Instead of debating money, the media and owners were left to grapple with mission and calling. The Packers front office, led by Wolf and team president Bob Harlan, understood the power of that framing. By making his decision about faith, White insulated himself from accusations of greed and forced other teams to pitch more than just dollars. The move was both sincere and strategic, shifting the balance of power in negotiations. Owners, already rattled by the threat of player freedom, now faced a new kind of leverage, one they could not outbid or control. Culture shock. When Reggie White arrived in Green Bay, the contrast was immediate. Wisconsin, a state where 96% of residents were white, offered a stark contrast to the world he had known in Chattanooga and Philadelphia. The city's small-town quiet and the team's battered reputation left little to distract from the work ahead. White's presence was more than a roster addition. It was a signal to the locker room that excuses were over. Get clean. One of his first acts was to pull Brett Favre aside. Favre, the young quarterback with a cannon for an arm, was spiraling, caught in a cycle of painkillers and late nights. White did not mince words. He told Favre, "You are wasting God's gift. Get clean or get out." The message landed. Favre later said he listened because it was Reggie, because no one else could have reached him. That moment of honesty became the foundation for a new team identity, one built on accountability, faith, and a willingness to confront hard truths. Mentor, and outsider. But the fit was never entirely smooth. White's blend of Southern evangelical faith and outspoken leadership sometimes clashed with the rhythms of a state that had rarely seen a black superstar in its midst. He became both mentor and outsider, celebrated and scrutinized, laying down a challenge to teammates and community alike. Embrace the discomfort or risk missing out on something bigger.
The Superdome in New Orleans thundered on January 26, 1997. The Green Bay Packers, after decades in the wilderness, faced the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 31. At 35, Reggie White took the field with a mission. Each snap was a collision of will. White broke through the Patriots line again and again, sacking Drew Bledsoe 3 times, a Super Bowl record that still stands. The final whistle sounded. Packers 35, Patriots 21. For Green Bay, it was the first championship in 29 years. For White, it was the answer to every doubt, every risk. He stood on the podium, eyes shining, and said, "This is what God sent me here for." The impact rippled beyond the field. Owners and agents watched as the first true superstar of free agency delivered a title to a small market team. Players across the league took notice. Within a year, free agents began choosing teams for fit, not just for paychecks or glamour. The average NFL salary soared, up 40% by 1998. The old power structure, built on control and fear, cracked wide open. Reggie White's gamble had paid off, not just for himself, but for every player who dreamed of choosing his own path. The league would never look the same. March 25th, 1998, Reggie White stood before the Wisconsin State Legislature as their honored guest. The invitation was a celebration. Super Bowl champion, beloved community figure, and a symbol of what football could mean to a small city. But as he spoke, the mood changed. White began describing the strengths of different racial and ethnic groups. He called black people gifted in worship and creativity, said Hispanics excel at family structure, claimed whites do a good job of organization, and praised Asians for invention. Intended as compliments, his words landed as sweeping stereotypes. Every sentence, meant to honor diversity, instead boxed entire communities into single traits. The fallout was immediate. Within days, sponsors pulled out. CBS Sports canceled a lucrative television contract. citing a misalignment with their values. Nissan ended its national ad campaign, and SC Johnson dropped White from their Edge shaving gel commercials. Together, those deals represented millions of dollars lost almost overnight. Teammates who once leaned on White for guidance now kept their distance, unsure how to respond. In the locker room, conversations grew tense. Some players felt betrayed, others embarrassed. Privately, Packers executives scrambled to answer calls from reporters and corporate partners demanding statements. White tried to explain. "I wasn't trying to offend anybody. I was trying to show that God made us all different and all special. I see now I didn't say it right." But the apology could not undo the damage. The speech, aired live on C-SPAN and replayed across the country, became a permanent record of an error that no amount of intent could erase. In the months that followed, Reggie White, once the heart of a city and a league, found himself isolated, caught between his convictions and a world that would no longer make excuses for them.
Reggie White's life never fit into simple categories. In the world of football, he was a labor trailblazer, a player who risked his career to break the NFL's grip on athletes, then used his newfound freedom to lift a forgotten city and change the business of sports. Yet, away from contract battles and courtrooms, White's worldview leaned toward the deeply conservative. He preached personal responsibility, spoke out against unions and other industries, and championed causes that sometimes clashed with the broader movement for workers' rights. For every headline calling him a hero for free agency, there was another describing his opposition to social change off the field. Reporters and teammates often struggled to reconcile these sides. Michael Wilbon once called him the rarest kind of rebel. Radical for the players, but conservative everywhere else. White could stand before a judge and demand economic justice for his peers, then turn around and quote scripture in ways that made some in the locker room uneasy. His sermons, powerful enough to sway a jury or a team, sometimes drew sharp lines on issues like sexuality or race, leaving allies divided and critics emboldened. Even his greatest victories carried this contradiction. The same man who fought to free players from a system of ownership also told the Wisconsin legislature that God had given each race a different purpose. He believed in fairness, but defined it on his own terms, rooted in faith, shaped by family, and often at odds with the world changing around him. In the end, Reggie White's legacy is a question as much as an answer. Can one person be both a champion for freedom and a voice for tradition? His story does not resolve that tension. It leaves it hanging, as complicated and unfinished as the world he tried to change. NFL players now choose teams, cities, and legacies on their own terms, because Reggie White proved they could. Yet, the same freedom that empowers athletes also exposes every word and belief to public scrutiny. In a league still wrestling with player activism and identity, his story reminds us, breaking barriers brings liberation, but also the burden of being seen whole. The cost of real change is living with every consequence.